please, if anything, if you know anything, please, I'm just begging you to bring him back. I took him out of the car seat and I laid him on the chair. And I had his diapers right here. And then someone said, hola. And I couldn't even turn, and I was just, I don't remember nothing. I got up off the floor.
At last, the truth surfaced. Every case has its turning point. And in the disappearance of baby Emanuel Haro, that moment didn't happen in a courtroom or under the harsh light of an interrogation. It happened in something far quieter, through the uneasy reactions of his mother, Rebecca Haro. When she faced the cameras, her words were short. But her pauses, her nervous glances, and the silence that followed spoke louder than anything she said. She didn't have to point a finger, her body language already had. It was as though she carried a dangerous secret, one she couldn't fully hide anymore. Her husband, Jake Haro, already had a dark past etched into court records. But when their story began to fall apart, the world asked one chilling question: did Rebecca know all along? Did she see the signs, hear the cries, and still remain silent? When the spotlight turned to Rebecca, her silence said more than her words. In that moment, millions of eyes were fixed on her, cameras flashing, reporters leaning in, investigators watching closely. And yet, it wasn't the sentences she spoke that captured attention. It was what she didn't say. It was the stillness between her words, the way her breath caught before answering, the hesitation that lingered just a second too long. Every pause, every glance downward told a story of its own. Was it fear, or was it guilt? Tonight's episode is titled, Rebecca Haro Finally Revealed Jake's Secret. But let it be clear, this revelation did not arrive in a courtroom, where testimony is sworn under oath. It didn't come from a heated exchange with detectives, or from a written statement. Instead, it unfolded in something far more subtle. In the pauses that carried unbearable weight, in the way her eyes fell to the floor whenever Jake's name was spoken, in the shadow of silence that followed her every denial. It was not a confession made with words. It was a confession etched in silence. Yesterday, we showed how neighbors, once quiet, finally spoke up, their voices breaking through the silence that had surrounded this family for far too long. We examined how whispered suspicions turned into statements, how the small cracks in Rebecca's story began to widen. And as those neighbors spoke, as their voices joined together, the polished surface of the Haros lies began to crumble. Today, we go further. Because every whisper matters. Every hesitant glance from Rebecca tells us more than she intended. Every uneasy testimony from those who live nearby adds another layer to the truth. Taken separately, they may seem like fragments, scattered pieces of a puzzle. But placed together, they create a picture too clear to ignore. And that picture leads to one undeniable conclusion: we are closer than ever to justice for Emanuel. On August 14, 2025, Rebecca claimed she was attacked in a parking lot while changing her 7-month-old son's diaper. She told investigators and the public that in that moment of panic and confusion, as she struggled to protect herself, her baby Emanuel was snatched away. She said Emanuel was kidnapped in the chaos, and with those words, panic spread across the community. The story spread like wildfire. Amber alerts went out within hours, flashing across phones, billboards, and television screens. Flyers were printed in bulk and posted on street corners, store windows, and neighborhood poles. Volunteers gathered, forming search parties that combed through fields, wooded trails, and highways. Law enforcement mobilized, helicopters circled overhead, and communities, desperate and determined, came together with one hope: to bring Emanuel home. For days, neighbors searched with flashlights in the dark, knocking on doors, calling out his name, refusing to give up. But soon, cracks began to form. The timeline Rebecca provided didn't add up. Witnesses who had been in that same parking lot that day came forward, saying they saw nothing unusual: no struggle, no masked figure, no vehicle speeding away. Investigators pressed Rebecca for details, and slowly, her version of events began to shift. What she had once claimed with certainty now wavered under questioning. And within days, the devastating truth came to light: there was no abductor. No masked figure in the shadows. No stranger waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It had all been a story, a carefully constructed cover meant to shield something far darker. Emanuel's disappearance did not begin in a parking lot. It did not come from outside forces. Emanuel's disappearance came from inside his own home. And as that cover story collapsed under the weight of evidence, the spotlight turned sharply toward the two people at the center of it all. Jake, with his violent past already carved into court records, and Rebecca, the mother who carried the lie, the woman who stood before cameras repeating a story that could not stand. When reporters questioned her, the world expected to see a grieving mother begging for her baby's return. The public anticipated desperate pleas, tears, and the frantic energy of a parent who would do anything to save her child. Instead, Rebecca hesitated. Cameras zoomed in on her face, but instead of fire, there was restraint. Her eyes dropped to the floor, refusing to meet the gaze of those who demanded answers. She withdrew into silence at the very moment when words were most needed. At times, her voice cracked with emotion, trembling just enough to suggest pain, but just as quickly she shut it down. She cut her answers short, pressing her lips together, as though every word was weighed against a secret she could not reveal. It was as though she lived with two truths: the one she told the public, a narrative of abduction, chaos, and fear, and the one she carried inside, heavy and unspoken, a truth that grew louder with every pause. Prosecutors now believe Emanuel suffered mistreatment before his death. Their case paints a chilling picture, one that suggests Emanuel's final days were marked not by a stranger's violence, but by suffering within the very walls of his home. And that realization forces a haunting question: how much did Rebecca know? If she noticed the bruises on his tiny body, the cries that pierced the night, the warning signs that could not be ignored, why didn't she act? Why didn't she speak? Why did she stay by Jake's side when every instinct should have driven her to protect her child? Because silence doesn't just protect the guilty. Sometimes, it condemns the innocent. And in this case, Rebecca's silence may have done both. Jake's past was no secret. In 2023, his name had already been written into court records for something unthinkable: injuring another infant, his own daughter. The child's injuries were permanent, leaving behind scars that no doctor could erase and no family could forget. Judges, lawyers, and medical experts all saw the truth of what he had done. And yet, instead of prison, Jake walked away with probation and work release. He was given freedom, a second chance at life, even after destroying the first chance of an innocent child. That single decision may be one of the most haunting failures of this case. Because that failure meant Jake remained free. And his freedom left Emanuel with no chance at life. Rebecca was there for all of it. She was not in the dark, nor was she shielded from the past. She read the court records, saw the documents that detailed the suffering of Jake's daughter. She knew what he was capable of. But still, she stood by him. She defended him in conversations, to friends, to family, to anyone who questioned why she stayed. She dismissed concerns, choosing to trust Jake's words over the facts that stared back at her in black and white. She chose to build a family with him, despite the warnings that history had already given her. And when Emanuel came along, innocent and defenseless, her silence became its own kind of betrayal. Because silence is not neutral. Silence, in this case, became protection for Jake, and abandonment for Emanuel. When Rebecca appeared in court, her expression wasn't that of a mother blindsided by tragedy. There were no sudden outbursts of grief, no desperate pleas for answers. Instead, she looked worn down, as if the weight of something unspoken had been pressing on her for far too long. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes tired, her face drawn with exhaustion, not just from loss, but from carrying a truth she could no longer hide. And while she never directly accused Jake, her silence became its own form of testimony. Every unanswered question hung in the air like a confession. Reporters noticed. Their headlines shifted tone, pointing out the contradictions in her demeanor. Investigators noticed. They studied her body language as carefully as her words, noting the hesitation, the avoidance, the tension that surfaced each time Jake's name was mentioned. And the public noticed, too. Viewers at home, watching interviews and courtroom footage, began to see the same cracks. The mask she had worn for so long had slipped. Her pauses. Her broken sentences. Her refusal to look straight into the camera. These small details became louder than anything she dared to say. Each hesitation painted a clearer picture than any statement could. And in that, the world saw what she couldn't admit, that she already knew.